Hello, my name is Chuck Kaiser. I come from America. Right now I'm in Kyoto, Japan, giving a presentation for Kyoto Sangyo University. And today is July 12th, 2022. Okay, so I'd like to show you just a brief introduction of what got me started farming, because I had never had any farming experience or interest while I lived in America. And when I came to Japan in 1998, I still did not have any interest. I lived in Shimane Prefecture in the countryside of Izumoshi, a fairly big town, small city, and very famous, very historical, but very boring, I thought, as a 27-year-old. So while it was very beautiful and wonderful, I wanted to live in a place with more foreigners and more nightlife and exciting things. So I moved to Kyoto in the year 2000. And after that, I opened my own English school and I worked for a while here and there in many different schools. I've worked in kindergartens, elementary schools, junior highs, high schools, and universities, mainly teaching English. I was fortunate enough to open my own school and meet a woman who had a small pottery workshop in the mountains of Shiga Prefecture in Kutsuki. And she invited me to go there to go camping with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. And we enjoyed it very much, and I fell in love with the area. And you can see how beautiful it is in the background. The river is so clean and pure, the mountainside and everything else. And you will see more photos of this through the presentation. But this is what really drew me here. This is called Unkai, which is the cloud ocean. There is Onyu Toge, which is a mountain pass, about 30 minutes drive from where I'm farming. And you're on top of a mountain. And if you look south, you can see this view in the autumn, the leaves changing color. And in the early morning, the mist is low in the valley, and it looks like an ocean of clouds. If I were to turn around 180 degrees and look north, I would see the Sea of Japan off about 30 kilometers away. So it's just spectacular place to be. And coming from Chicago originally, especially when I was a child, there was a lot of snow in the wintertime. And well, snow is very troublesome, of course. It's very cold, and Chicago is an incredibly cold place. I don't come from the downtown city area. I come from the suburbs, about 30 miles or about 50 kilometers outside the city. So we had a big yard and a big driveway that I had to shovel with snow. But a heavy snowfall always meant no school. So, of course, every child in the whole area loved snow days. So I fell in love with snow very early. I also like skiing and playing in the snow as well. So I've always loved nature. And this is the same river that was in my opening picture. Just in every season, this place in Kutsuki is just spectacular. I was very lucky to have found this, this place because it is just so wonderful. I'm just going to check to see that I'm recording. I'm not sure I am, actually. Please just give me one moment. How do I check that? Do you know? Manya, do you know? Oh, is it right here?
If you go on, should be. Oh, this is Keynote, right?
I'm going to
So,
stop
on the browser,
sharing.
yes.
Oh, it is recording. Okay. Please excuse me. I'm a pretty good farmer, but I'm not a very good person with technology. So. And we're back. This is my son when he was about 5 years old. Having a place like this to take him, living in the city, we live in Nakagyoku, downtown Kyoto, which is not so industrial or anything, but having a beautiful natural place to go with my son made me remember my childhood. My father was big into fishing and hunting and camping. I was a Boy Scout. I learned a lot through experiencing nature firsthand. So I wanted to do the same for my son. And this was my whole inspiration to really start doing something in this area. I wanted to have a place to bring my son, just like my father had created places to bring me when I was a child. And my son absolutely adores going up there still, although he's now almost 12 years old. He still enjoys swimming in the river and going hiking and camping and things like that. That was the original reason I started going up there. And I wanted to build a log cabin. I'm a little bit of a carpenter, nothing professional, but I was able to reform my own machiya here in Kyoto City. And I've done some other buildings as well. So I fancied, oh, I'd love to make a log cabin. And there's a lot of cedar trees, sugi, in the mountains of all over Japan, actually, except for Hokkaido. And they're quite a problem for the environment and for the animals. And for anyone who has kafunjo, right? That's probably because of the sugi, right? There's just too many, sugiru, right? So this sort of made me imagine that cedar is a wonderful wood for constructing houses, which is why Japan has so many, is because Japan intentionally planted the sugi to build houses and repair houses throughout the centuries. And the place that I'm farming now in Keihoku is quite famous for farming the sugi, very long straight poles. And they have a technique where they can farm the same tree for hundreds of years and it'll keep producing. One tree will just keep producing these poles. So it's a really wonderful idea, but when there's too many, unfortunately, it creates some issues. So I felt like I would be able to go in, cut down some sugi and use that to build a log cabin, which was my intention when I started really focusing on this area. However, I was unable to buy the land for this and that, and people encouraged me just to garden instead. Just set up a garden, Chuck. You'll enjoy that. And so I did. And it was just a year or two of gardening, once a month when I could go up there, that I just fell in love with gardening. And this is a view of one of my very early fields. You can see that on the left is the farmer who owns the field with the bags and the clear soil and the nice professional looking place. Whereas right in front of the kongi, the tiller, is my field with some negi growing that are already producing flower heads. So I certainly wasn't a professional and I'm still not, but I keep working hard and learning different techniques, how to cover the soil to keep the weeds down, how to keep the water in, how to build a fence to keep the deer out. That's very important. And many other techniques that I've learned until finally I became good enough to produce one of the most difficult crops to produce is heirloom tomatoes. These do not look like the tomatoes in your supermarket. Well, some of them don't, because these are quite unique tomatoes. And I had to learn that it's quite hard to produce these. The people who produce them usually use greenhouses and very controlled conditions, whereas I was growing them in the open air, in nature. So this was part of my learning curve. This was about the time where I was able to harvest out all of my summer crops, my tomatoes, my cucumbers, my zucchini, my eggplants, my peppers, my beans, potatoes, these kinds of things that I had finished. And this was probably about maybe October. And I started growing a winter crop for the first time. And this was an amazing transition for me because I felt like, wow, I'm producing real food now. Not only do I have a space to just have a little garden, but I'm actually slowly becoming a farmer. These are the older gentlemen, the seniors of the village where I started farming. On the left, Aki-san, he is up in his tree at 85 years old, trimming it and pruning it, and he's incredibly active and knowledgeable. He likes to go up into his mountains and find these rare trees and flowers and transplant them onto his property. And he's taught me a lot about how to balance that and how to grow things. Unfortunately, like many, many elderly farmers these days, he's been convinced to use chemicals to treat the weeds around his place, because honestly, when you have a place in the mountains, cutting weeds is about 30 to 40% of your time during the warmer months. It's a lot of work to keep the kusakari jobs, done. So a lot of them have found that spraying weed killer, especially the dreaded Roundup, which is basically my enemy, in the borders of his place, was much more convenient than actually having to cut the weeds. And the man on the right, while not a farmer or even really much of a gardener, he owns the land that I first used for a farm, which is the picture that you saw just 2 slides ago with the black plastic. He's the one who gave me my first opportunity. He's the one who came up with the idea to let me garden for a while, because I wanted to buy a piece of his land, and the document for the land was so old, I was unable to buy it. I'd have to remake a document which doubled the land price. And he was very kind and generous. Said, just use the land as a garden. That's what my wife had been doing. And it was overgrown, but it also had a lot of akashiso, or red perilla, and myoga. And I'm not even sure how to say that in English, but I think if you've lived in Japan, you've probably encountered myoga. It's kind of like a Japanese ginger, a wild ginger plant. Well, as I started to farm more and more, I found myself, first of all, making lots and lots of mistakes. I had to learn as I went. I did not study farming in a classroom. I did not read any books. I did not visit any other farms to ask for advice or to get some experience. I simply just trial and error, and a lot of error. And I also found that I had a lot of time on my hands in the car, driving the 1 hour and 10 minutes to the farm and the 1 hour and 10 minutes home, as often as I went to the farm. And I found that, wow, maybe I should be listening to some farming podcasts. And this was the first one that I found that really helped me out. This is Chris Blanchard, and he did the Farmer to Farmer podcast. And he created 200 episodes, each more than 1 hour long, interviewing farmers all over North America, including Mexico and Canada, and asking them basically, like, what are you growing? How are you growing it? How are you selling it? What are your best points? What are your worst points, your problems? And then things like that. And since listening to this, I've created my own podcast, where I interview different people working in agriculture or in food or in sustainability and things like that. And I'm no professional at it. He's a professional. But I found that what really was different about his podcast was he was a farmer, and he was interviewing other farmers. And the conversation there was really amazing, because I've been interviewed by maybe 4 or 5 different people, for some of them a few times. And they're not growers, they're not farmers or gardeners. They don't really know much about agriculture and things like that. But the podcasts are very professional, but the questions they ask are not very deep, unfortunately. Whereas when a farmer talks to a farmer, everybody else in the room just walks away, because we're so deep in conversation, asking about insects and seeds and techniques and weather and things like that. Nobody else can keep up. And that's what his podcasts are. This guy, Chris Blanchard, is amazing. I highly recommend anyone and everyone to listen to some of his shows if you're interested in agriculture. Now, this guy, Mike McGrath, he does a radio show that's changed a lot over the years, even since I've been listening to it from about 4 years ago. And he started out in agriculture. He went to university and he was growing for a while. And then he became the editor for Organic Gardening magazine in the States. And he did that for maybe 20 years. And then he started this radio show, and he has a question of the week where people write into him or call into him and ask these questions. And he spends 5 minutes talking about that question. But the whole show is about 40 or 45 minutes long. And during the rest of that time, people call him live and say, hey, I'm having a problem with my roses, my tomatoes, my lawn, my trees. And he'll answer all their questions to his best ability. And I got to say, this guy is fantastic. He's like an encyclopedia. He'll be the first to say he doesn't know everything. But if he doesn't, he'll research it and he'll get back to the people. And it's just full of interesting little tidbits, often that don't really relate to farming. Because again, he's dealing with people with a small garden or people with a tree, things that just I don't have. But in general, his advice is solid, and I've gotten a lot of wisdom from him. So both he and Chris Blanchard have really been kind of my professors of agriculture to learn as I went. These are some of the things that I found. On the left side, you'll see some wood frame built around that's kind of empty, and that is called a raised bed frame. Bed is the area where you put your vegetables in the garden. You have your walkway and you have your bed. And you don't want to step on your beds because you'll push the soil down, damage roots and things like that. You want to keep your beds nice and fluffy, especially if you till them, or even if you don't. And so these would be filled with soil. And you can see on the right side, it's already full of soil and plants and some black plastic and some trellises. And these are pepper plants with the Spanish trellis. And in this way, you can see on the right-hand picture, there's kind of a bed next to it that doesn't have the frame around it to kind of compare. The greatest thing about this is Japan has a rainy season, which puts a lot of water on the farm every year, but it also has typhoons. And we've experienced some doozies up in the farm there. And also a lot of water, too much water all at once. And the third thing is the heavy snowfall. When I first started farming there, there was more than 1 meter of snow on the ground for 3 months of the year. Due to climate change, if you don't believe in it, I'm sorry, I certainly do, because due to climate change, nowadays there's about 30 or 40 centimeters for about 1 month. And that's it. But when it was over 1 meter high for 3 months, and then it would melt, again, putting just too much water on the farm. And you might be thinking, Chuck, why is too much water bad for the farm? Especially, when plants need water. Well, too much water is bad for anything, even us, right? We can drown. So the plants could drown, but also erosion is a really big issue. You, as a farmer, you create your soil. Your soil is your medium. Much like a painter who's painting a portrait will spend hours mixing colors until they get just the right color. And then that's what they use. So will a farmer. A farmer will spend years and years and never stop. But it will take a few years to really create a good working soil. It's not just dirt. Soil is alive. Soil is full of these things that most people don't even think about. All these nutrients, all these organisms, and all this different organic matter mixed together to create an environment where healthy plants want to grow. And they can be as strong as they can. Just imagine any living organism, a human, a dog, a fish, a bird, or a plant does better when it's in a healthy environment. And that's what we want for our vegetables, right? We want to eat healthy vegetables, and healthy vegetables grow in healthy soil. So keeping that soil on your farm is very important. Erosion, like a typhoon comes through and puts, 10 centimeters of rain on your farm in 5 hours. By soil, it's all washed away. So these raised beds help keep that soil right where it is. They also improve drainage because you can really fluff your soil there and the water will go through and not have any issue with staying there and flooding out the plants. And there's other things as well, like it helps keep weeds down because weeds will grow sideways. They can't grow up a wall and then down, so they won't spread into your farm. And there are some other issues, like you don't have to bend over as much because the level of your soil is 10 centimeters or 15 centimeters higher than the ground. So there are many advantages to these raised beds. Again, I never would have known about these raised beds had it not been for people like Mike McGrath and Chris Blanchard. Spanish trellis too, would have no idea about that. This was a big changing point in my life for sustainability and my farm. This is called composting, and I'm sure you've heard of it. And composting is basically taking waste organic matter, allowing it to process naturally to become soil. So you can see the person holding soil there on the right side of the picture. That's what all that food scrap used to be. It all becomes soil. When we die, we become soil too. Every living thing that dies becomes soil, basically. I mean, of course, things in the ocean, it's arguable that there's not really a soil there. But actually, if you were to take it out and let it die on Earth and break down, it would become soil. So this sort of thing, allowing this natural process to occur, is really good for the environment, first of all. I mean, how many of you compost? You do, great. That's fantastic. Where do you put your compost, though? How do you use your compost? Very good. I'm very glad to hear that. I bet you're very unique among your friends. That I don't think very many people do that. It's very troublesome, especially in a city, to have a whole bunch of food waste that cockroaches and flies and crows and all these other fruit flies and bugs want to get in there and eat that. Plus, it just stinks, right? So you have to do it correctly. For your neighbor's sake, you don't want to be a bad member of the community. So it is very rare to run across people who are also composting. I do it as well, but of course I have farms. I carry a bucket with me once a week with all my food scraps. And actually I have a bucket outside for my neighbors to give me their food waste if they want, and they do. And then I compost that. And composting is a wonderful, wonderful way to feed your soil. It's not really giving it nitrogen or phosphorus or potassium. Those are the three big elements or minerals that you want to make sure your plants have. But it's a way to feed your soil to create a natural environment through composting bacteria. These bacteria create this environment that plants just love to grow in. It makes them really, really strong. I'm sure you know something about there's bacteria in your intestines and your stomach to help you break down your food. Well, this is kind of the same thing in the soil. These composting bacteria are breaking down these other things so that plants can draw up those nutrients much better. So you're basically giving your plants real food versus a chemical fertilizer, which is basically like we stop eating our food and we just take vitamins. Well, on scientific paper, we might look healthy because we have enough iron, we have enough vitamin C, we have enough of all these minerals and vitamins, but I don't think we're going to feel very good. I don't think we're going to be very strong and healthy looking. That's the same for the plants. If you're just giving chemical fertilizer, they're going to produce something that looks okay, but it really isn't as healthy and strong or good for us as if they're eating what they should be eating, which is why I stress to people, try to eat organic, try to compost, because this is not only better for you, but it's better for the environment. Because aside from one of you who composts, the rest of you put your food scraps into the trash and they take it to burn it. What a horrible thing. Right? What a tragedy to lose out on the opportunity for that nutrition for your next meal, and also to put more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere to increase global warming. So I really highly recommend trying to compost when you have the opportunity. Now, raised beds, composting. I was becoming a good farmer. This is one day's harvest about 6 or 7 years ago. I was freaking out. One day I had this many, I'm going to say it, perhaps you'll know this word, squash. Squash, right? This is what we call most of these. Now there's some okra and some cucumbers up in the corner there, but the rest of these are squash, okay? Which is an American, not just North America, but American word for cucurbits that are zucchini, summer squash, pumpkins, kabocha, things like that. There's butternuts there as well, yellow squash. I love growing squash. It's one of my very favorite plants. It's a beautiful plant, very big and robust, gorgeous orange yellow flowers, and the fruits of the flowers are just so good. I just ate half of one in my salad without even cooking it. It's so delicious. And they're so gorgeous looking. They're cute, adorable. In fact, I have a few here to show you in a few minutes. But this was one day, and this was before I was selling vegetables. What am I going to do with this many? And now, Mon, you might remember, I was giving it out at the dojo for a while of Aikido. We do Aikido together. And I still couldn't get rid of it all. So I had to figure out, what am I going to do with this? This is all my potatoes from one year on the left and all my sweet potatoes on the right. I mean, I love potatoes, but no way could a family of 3 eat this many potatoes in 1 year. So I was really stuck with trying to figure out how the heck am I going to get rid of all this stuff? That's where I came across the idea of distribution. Distribution is basically the sales or the movement of these vegetables from one person to another. And I started with restaurants. And I found that restaurants, although some are willing, a lot of them have contracts, very strict contracts with one farmer. And that farmer will supply everything that restaurant wants at a good price if that restaurant promises not to buy from anybody else, if that farmer sells. Now, if the farmer doesn't, that registered farmer doesn't have, for example, squash, well, then they're allowed to go to another farmer. But I had mostly what other people had. So it was really difficult for me to break into that market of restaurants. And even so, restaurants want their produce at a certain time of day, probably right around 9 a.m. when they open for, to start preparing for lunch, or around 3 p.m. when they close from lunch and start preparing their dinner. And I'm at the farm at those times. I cannot deliver vegetables at those times. So it wasn't really a good match for me. Farmers markets. Now, these are very popular in the States. In Kyoto City, I know of 2, and they're not regular, actually 3. They're not regular though. There's the Marché at the French Institute, which is maybe once a month now. They were a bit off for COVID. And I've never worked that one, although I'm interested to go. I'm always invited. And then there's Kyoto's Farmers Market, who I know the founder of that, and they're pretty good. And then there's one down south near Kyoto Station. I can't remember the name of it. But farmers markets, I think, are better for the customer than for the farmer, because basically a farmer spends all their time growing vegetables, cutting the grass, taking care of things. And it's a big job almost every day. What are they going to do on their day off? Go to work, to the farmer's market, take all their vegetables and hope they can sell out. And if they don't, guess what? They've wasted their day. And I wasted a few days doing that, so I gave that up. It's really quite hard for an organic farmer believing in sustainability to compete in the Japanese market, because my vegetables don't look perfect. My vegetables aren't wrapped in plastic. Nobody wants to buy them because it's not trusted. It doesn't look good. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the Japanese people. I'm just saying the way people buy vegetables in Japan, look at the carrots. Every single carrot looks exactly the same. How do they do that? Even as a farmer, I still am puzzled. How do they make them all look exactly the same? Beautiful, orange, same shape, same exact size. Mine are all straggly and some have 2 legs and they've got the greens on them, still a little dirt around the thing, and no plastic. So it just wasn't a good fit for me either to try to sell at farmers markets. A farm stand. I tried this at a few different places, and unfortunately, mostly I have summer vegetables, and leaving my vegetables out in the summer, in the heat, they would get a lot of rotting and a lot of insects and a lot of other things. So this also wasn't a very good fit for me, to where I finally settled on the CSA, Community Supported Agriculture, or the TK system. This is the kind of way that people used to sell vegetables until about 60 or 70 years ago, probably all over the world. You knew your farmer, you got your 1 basket a week. You have a regular subscription, right? You grew some things in your own garden, but some things you just couldn't do very well, so you hired a farmer to do it for you. Now, the CSA is becoming much more popular now in the West. I know in Europe, it's really very popular. And I think maybe it was even France that kind of revived the idea. America, it's really catching on. But the TK system in Japan isn't really catching on so much. Instead, in Japan, there are third-party organizations or companies that will buy vegetables from a lot of different farmers, put together a mixed box and send those out. And this sounds great, right? And it is great for that company, and it is great for the customer. But the farmer, unfortunately, ends up with about 30 or 40% of the final sales price of that vegetable. And I visited one, I'm not going to say which one, and I heard their spiel. They said, okay, Chuck, you grow all the vegetables. You take the best ones you have, you wash them, you wrap them in plastic, and then you ship them to us I have to pay for shipping. And I will sell that kabocha for 500 yen. I will give you 200 yen. And I said, goodbye. That's not for me. That's not fair, you know? And this is the imbalance that a lot of us farmers are facing, is it's hard for us to do two jobs, growing the vegetables and selling the vegetables. It is a struggle that we all deal with. And especially if we're only a small farmer like I am, it's really hard. So there are these companies that will do that. And I may have to actually sell some to them this year, but it's a difficult way to fit sustainable farming into my life at this moment. I'm still struggling with it, but as a farmer, I feel like struggle is just part of the job. This is a lovely woman who owned an Italian restaurant years ago. And she was my very first customer. I really enjoyed delivering to her. She is a fantastic lady, and it really gave me a lot of hope to have a customer that wanted to buy my vegetables. And actually, when I first started selling to her, I would give her like 10 zucchini, and I would just ask her for a big plate of pasta. And that was a good trade for me. This is me at a farmer's market. This is one of my farm stands. And this is my website talking about my TK system or my CSA. So now this is how most of my customers find me. They can, people move to Kyoto or traveling through and they say, where can I buy organic vegetables in Kyoto? Google. And Google will say, hey, Midori Farm as one of the top 5 searches. This is my basket that I just delivered last week. You can see a lot of mixed vegetables there. I try to have at least 7 varieties in each basket for 2,000 yen. Depending on where it's delivered, it may be 2,500. Well, so I had the vegetables. The vegetables were sorted. I was able to produce a lot of them. But what I was lonely, and I wanted some people to help. I wanted someone to talk to, because I'm literally driving 2.5 hours every day to and from the farm, and then working all day out in the country by myself. I was becoming a little lonely. Some people came along and said, hey, I'd love to visit your farm. I'm like, why? They're like, I'd like to help. I'm like, really? And they said, yeah. I'm like, I can't pay you. And they're like, I don't want any money. And I said, okay. And this started a trend for me to try to get more and more people out to the farm, because I really enjoyed having them there, not only to talk to and not only to help me, but I could tell that what I was doing was having an impact on their lives, because they were then able to experience farming as well. Without me, they didn't have that chance. The chance that I had never had, I was actually giving to other people. And that came in 4 different ways: events, helpers, volunteers, and tours. This is one of my early events at the campground that's just across the river from my first farm. And I know this was about 7 years ago, because that's my son holding the butterfly net when he was about 4 years old. And it was great having a lot of families up with kids. Kids love the outdoors as well. And they were able to go camping, have a barbecue, go hiking in the mountains, and visit the farm. And this is us hiking up the mountain to this giant horse chestnut tree, or tochinoki. And it's so massive that Manu and I cannot even touch hands around it. It's so huge. We need 4 other people really to be able to circle the tree. And the river is just so clean and cool. In the summertime, this is the absolute best place to be in the world. And of course, I would take the kids on the farm as well. And they were naturally curious, seeing the tomatoes that they would eat, and the peppers and the beans and the corn and everything that they liked eating on the plants themselves. They had no idea these things actually grew on plants, or had never actually seen it up close. We're able to touch it. We're able to pick one and try it right off the plant. And this is us also seeding some shiitake logs, which was a very exciting activity for everybody. And my son also liked helping me with the tiller. And I found out that friends did as well. They wanted to come out and help me out, and learn how to do this stuff and partake of the experience in nature, learning how to grow food. And this snowballed into more and more friends coming up. with their families. And then I was told about Workaway. I don't know if you've ever heard about this organization. There's also an organization called WOOF, which is one of the oldest volunteer organizations for organic farms. But Workaway as well. You can volunteer in over 170 countries all over the world when you sign up as a volunteer. And as a host, that's who I am, I create housing and the opportunity to receive people and give them the chance to come out and stay with me and learn about farming, help me out, and I give them a place to stay. And it's a wonderful exchange. I've had maybe 30 or 40, or maybe even more than that. I've lost count. Volunteers from maybe 12 or 15 countries all over the world. As a young person, I recommend you to try this. You don't have to go to a farm. You could work in the city at a cafe. You could go to schools, shelters, lots of different wonderful humanitarian and environmental organizations have these sorts of hosts as well. It's a great way to travel on the cheap. And these were some of my very first volunteers. And it was wonderful to have them out. I found them very curious about how things grew, and they were very motivated to help and to learn. And it wasn't just the vegetables. It wasn't just being in a beautiful natural surrounding. These three had never known each other till they met on my farm. And now they're still friends. This was probably 5 years ago. And I'm still friends with all of these people. And that was another thing that was very attractive to them, to meet people from different countries in an activity that they were all doing together, because they were sort of thrown in the mix, staying together in this house in the country with nothing to do. There was no Wi-Fi. There was no TV. There wasn't a radio. There was a wood stove to heat the house and the bathtub. There was a stereo with some old CDs that I had and some books. And then nature, and they had to cook all their meals and just have a wonderful time. And one of those volunteers actually recommended to me to start a tour through Airbnb experiences to bring people from the city up to my farm and show them around and make some extra money, which is something almost all small farmers like myself need to do, because selling vegetables just is no way you're going to make enough money. So we were always trying to diversify and try to do different things. And this was a great thing. And I was really doing well with this. People were coming to Japan from all over the world, coming to Kyoto, the best city, right? #1 for tourism, or at least it used to be before COVID. And they would visit, all the big shrines and temples. They would go, Fushimi Nari and Kiyomizudera and Gion and all these really wonderful places. They're like, we want to spend a day out in the country. So they'd register with me. I drive them up in my old little car, through the mountains, giving them the basics about Sugi, or, the cedar trees, or the valleys that, are being depopulated, and the rice fields and the mountains and the river. And then we'd go to the farm. They'd help me out actually on the farm. We'd have lunch next to the river, do some more farming or hiking in the afternoon. Then I'd drive them home, and they would review me as, this is the best thing we did in Japan. So I was really inspired then that this is something that's really valuable, not just for money, but for sharing this experience with people. And here's hoping that Japan will open its borders soon, because I would love to start these tours again. I've only had 2 this year, and I'm used to having 10 or 12 of them. But people bringing their children out, young couples meeting on the farm. 2 of these people are volunteers. 2 of them are on the tour. And they were able to talk and spend time together. They're still friends. After 4 years, they're still friends. So that's what I mean. It's almost like the farm is like a place of a catalyst that creates the opportunity for people to really get to know each other well, because you're thrust into such a wonderful activity. It's like a party. This is a group of about 15 family members from the Philippines who came up in 2020, actually. They were my last tour before COVID shut me down. And they're farmers in the Philippines. And what did they want to do on their wedding party to Japan? Visit another farm. So It's really inspiring for me to have people like this come out. And on the right, you'll see two of my volunteers there. One is from Ireland, the other from France. These are my statistics for the past 5 years. Lots of volunteers and tours and events, lots of people. That is part of the experience for me of farming. It's not just, I want to produce vegetables. I am part of a continuum that has been part of our culture since the periods that your sensei has talked to you about, when people learned how to grow their own food. It's not just growing your food for your family and then you pass away. You must necessarily pass that information on to the next generation. Give people the experience to do it themselves, to feel what the soil is like, to see the insects and the weather and to get a sense of things so that they then can do that again and again and again. For 10,000 years, this has been going on all over the world. I'm suddenly part of this really long tradition, and I feel very proud and lucky and honored to be a part of it. How much time do we have left? Oh, we're about halfway done. All right. Okay. Well, I thought I'd talk a little bit about what's new with me, because that was kind of what I'd been doing before COVID hit. And then, of course, COVID changed everybody's life. Everybody was impacted. Fortunately, producing vegetables and delivering them in my car, I found I was able to still do quite well. In fact, when I would knock on people's doors with their delivery, they'd be like, Chuck, oh my gosh, so good to see anybody. Because they're shut in, right? Like we all were. We couldn't meet anybody. Of course, I'm masked, they're masked, but I'm delivering this fresh food. They weren't able to go out and get themselves another face. And I was just doing basically the same thing. So what I decided to do is take farming full time, which was a big jump for me. I'd always had a second job. In Japan, they call most farmers han no han ex, which means half farmer, half something else to make money, because you're not going to do it farming. And that's what I had been doing the whole time until 2021, where I took over some new farms in Kyoto, which is actually part of Kyoto City, but it's quite up in the mountains, almost as far as Kutsuki, in a different valley, but also north of Kyoto City. And I don't know if you know this, but actually Sangyo University is quite elevated, I think, after coming here. You're maybe 100 meters or so above sea level, whereas downtown Kyoto City is about 50. So maybe you're about 150, I'm not sure. But Keihoku is 300 meters above sea level and a much narrower valley than Kyoto. And Kutsuki is 370 meters above sea level in a very narrow valley. And this may not mean much to you, but to a farmer who relies on the climate and the weather patterns and the hot and the cold and the insects, everything is different up in the mountains. Everything is different. So for me, having farms up in the mountains is much more challenging in a lot of ways, but it's also much better because everything is much more natural and alive, because there's less of us living there. We're the ones who are creating these changes in the environment. With less people, there's less change. So there's a stronger insect population, which can be tough, but at the same time, the soil is very rich and healthy. The water is very clean and full of minerals, and it's really good for the farm. Really, really great place to grow vegetables. So I started my farms in Keihoku, and those are now my main farms. I created I'd done my YouTube channel for a few years before that, but I really took it more seriously. And now I've got almost 60 videos up on it, which I'm really proud of. I'm no professional, and a lot of them are kind of boring or not so good, but I feel like I'm giving people the opportunity to see what I'm doing. And even if they don't learn anything, perhaps they're inspired to do something themselves. I was able to get some money from a grant program to help support some of my activities. I created a community farm to grow sweet potatoes. I know Japan used to have a long-standing tradition of kindergartners being able to harvest sweet potatoes in the fall, in the late summer or early fall. And a lot of those programs have stopped just because in Kyoto City, especially since tourism really boomed, the land prices went really high. So people who used to own small gardens or plots of land or farms sold that land for a premium price. And now there's houses or parking lots or shops where there used to be farms. So the opportunity has really been reduced for kids to be able to go out and harvest sweet potatoes. Well, I've been doing this sweet potato harvesting thing for over 5 years now with kids. And it's always a big hit with everybody, the parents, the kids. Once they pull up, because you look at a sweet potato plant, it's just some leaves coming out of the ground on this big vine. And I've usually cleared those away. And the kids are just like, what are we doing here? You know, and I said, okay, pull on this, pull. And they pull out these giant sweet potatoes and they're like, oh, this is great. And in an hour, they've cleared the whole field. I don't have to tell them to do anything. They know what to do. So it's this sort of connection that I wanted to create for this grant program. So I was able to do this with some funding, and that's been great for my community. And just like perhaps you might have seen on my channel and kind of what I'm doing here today, online farm events. So people can see what I'm doing on the farm in person or just on a video. And I think these are really great ways for people to be introduced to what does a farm look like? What do farmers do every day? And for people who are trying themselves, whether it be in a small container on their balcony or in a big field out in the country, some advice or some tips. And also, I need help. I need tips. So hopefully some people can get in touch with me and say, Chuck, I know that problem you're having. You should try this. And you know what? We do. Farmers are great collaborators. We love to share advice. We love to share seeds, and we love to learn from other farmers. It's a really great way to form a community, is to become a grower yourself. This is Kehoku. Kutsuki, as I said, is a quite narrow valley, and this is the Kehoku Valley. And one of the things I was really amazed by was just how far I can see, because there's no big buildings. So I can see for like a kilometer. And it's just such a rare thing in Japan, isn't it? To be able to see so far away over a flat area. Whereas where I come from, outside of Chicago, you can see for 15, 20 kilometers across the very flat plains of Illinois. It's what I grew up with. So I love Kyoto City. I love seeing the mountains in the background and everything, but being able to really look out for a really great distance, I don't know, something in me just relaxed. And I really, really like it up there. This is a field that I took over last year for my sweet potato field for the community farm grant program. And this is what it looked like. I was about a third of the way done cutting the grass before I took this picture. And I worked myself really, really hard. As your sensei can probably attest, I lost a lot of weight in the last 2 years because I took on farming full time. I wasn't fat, I don't think, but I was much thicker than I am now, because this is me working one day in the summer, just sweating buckets and loving the work, but at the same time just being exhausted at the end of the day. But able to create this wonderful farm, and it was a very successful harvest for sweet potatoes that year, though I didn't really add any pictures of that. But this is an example of what the before and after can look like for us. This is my YouTube website. So I invite people to come there and watch, but the most important thing is to understand that it's not the quality of the videos or the content. It's really people just trying to share what they're doing. And I hope that other people can be inspired by that to whatever they're doing. If they're making little barrettes or jewelry or paintings or walking around or helping the environment, to share these things with other people, it creates the opportunity for other people to know that, oh, it's okay to do this. And not only okay, but it's interesting for other people as well. Again, I'm very small channel, just 200 or so subscribers. So I don't feel like I'm a huge YouTuber or anything, but I do feel very motivated to continue doing this. This is one of my online farming events that happened, April 3rd of this year. I've been joined by this guy, John Walsh. You can see his picture under mine. He's an urban farmer in Tokyo. And we talk about the differences between city and country, growing in a farm versus growing in small plots in Tokyo. And he sets up rooftop gardens and balcony gardens and community gardens for people. And his experience is I don't want to say limited, but just different from mine. And we always have a lot of great things to share. In fact, just 2 days ago, we did the fourth installment of our series called Fantastic Farming. And it's always very wonderful. We have a bunch of people join who can ask questions. And on Sunday last, when we did it, we had two farmers join us actually, or one farmer and one person who's creating the system of collecting vegetables from other farmers and selling them. And they were able to join us live and talk about what they were doing. So it's great to grow communities around these sorts of things. But as a farmer, we have to remember what we did last year, what we're doing now, and what we're doing next year. So I'm always wondering, what am I going to do next? Again, the Han no Han X, what am I going to do to make money? Because the farming thing, I've got it down. I've just got to find some other way to make money. And I was an English teacher for over 20 years, so I could just go back to being an English teacher, but I'd much rather use the farming as part of what I'm doing. So I'm thinking of creating a Eigo de Nogyo Taiken. So people could come out and have an experience on the farm and learn and practice their English at the same time. Especially if COVID continues, which who knows it might, there won't be any foreigners to come to visit the farm. So I'd rather tap into the Japanese population more and more. And I thought that might be a good way to do it. I've also started setting up my website with some consultation opportunities for people to call me up or have me visit their farm or garden or balcony or whatever, if they want to set one up, so that I can give them some advice. And the last one is called SOS Green Screening. For about 7 years now, we've run a group called Seeds of Sustainability Kyoto. And this is a group that I set up with a friend of mine to try to do something for sustainability. We live in a city full of artists and innovators and a very old culture, but at the same time, a very modern way of life. And there wasn't anybody who had a group like this. So we created one, and we'd have meetups and events, camping, and we even did a few Pechakucha nights. I don't know if you know what Pechakucha is, but it's a kind of a mini TED Talk. Pechakucha was set up by some architects in Tokyo. Some foreigners, some Japanese. The architects were tired of going to talk to other architects, and one architect would talk for like 3 hours, and nobody else had any time to talk. So they set up this 20 by 20 format. They said, okay, you've got 6 minutes, 40 seconds, which is, you get 20 slides, each slide for 20 seconds each. So even if you want to talk more about that slide in 20 seconds, your picture is going to change. So it really makes people speed up and talk much faster so that you can hear other people. So we would there's a Pechakucha group all over the world. There's more than 1,500 all over the world now, starting in Tokyo about 15 years ago. And there's a group in Kyoto. It was very successful before COVID. And we knew the people running it. So we would tell them, hey, we want to set up your autumn Pechakucha night as a sustainability themed one. And we did this 3 times. And we would bring in people that we found who are doing something wonderful for sustainability. And the group has kind of fallen out of use during COVID, but we're going to create this screening, this kind of film festival. And we're right now still processing everything, but we're inviting people with sustainable initiatives to create a short video that will then show and allow other people to see it. And then we'll share it on YouTube and in a live Zoom event, and with everybody watching it live here in Kyoto City. So this is something that I'm really excited about. Even though it doesn't have anything to do with farming, I'm really passionate about the environment and sustainability, and I love doing stuff like this. So if you're in the city in probably late October, early November, we'll be doing this SOS green screening, probably at a place called Soko, which is at near Marutamachi, Kawaramachi, right near there, right near Totoya, the Zero Waste Shop, and right near Que Pasa, one of the best Mexican restaurants in Kyoto. So I think that you probably studied some of this with your sensei, that we've really changed the natural environment through our farming techniques. And you can see that very clearly with the rice fields across Asia, flooding the fields and terracing them up on the mountainside. We've really created the optimum environment to grow our own food. But that's not always the best thing for the environment. In fact, it's often damaging. So that's why I tell people, if you're going to eat, you should try to eat local. You should try to eat seasonal food and organic if possible, because these will have the lowest impact on the environment, and try to reduce the changes that we've already made. Some statistics that you may or may not know about, but Japan is in really bad shape for self-sufficiency for food. Japan imports more than 70% of its calories. It was at 40% in 2009. It's below 30%. It's right around 30% right now. And you might wonder to yourself, but I'm eating, even if you eat meat, I don't eat meat, but even if you eat beef, I'm eating Japanese beef, Wagyu. It's one of the best in the world. So think about that cow. That cow grew up in Japan. So it's Japanese. But what did that cow eat? It's growing up for maybe 2 years when they slaughter it. The cow eats more than the cow weighed when they slaughtered it. It ate more food than it weighs. Where did that food come from? It did not come from Japan. So the importation of all that cow or chicken or pig's food, that's what creates such a negative impact on the self-sufficiency, food self-sufficiency of Japan. And this is from the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries. There's a report every year. You can read it in English or Japanese. Things are really looking bad for Japan. So that's why I also encourage people, eat the Japanese diet. If everybody ate the Japanese diet, which means no flour, so no breads, no cookies, no cakes, sorry, no tempura. Again, our self-sufficiency goes way up because all that's important. Japan cannot grow wheat like other countries can. So if we're all trying to eat more Japanese food or more Japanese diet, our self-sufficiency goes up, our environmental impact goes down, and probably our health will also increase, because I got to say the Japanese diet is super healthy and delicious. One of the biggest problems is also the number of farms in Japan is greatly reducing every year. 30% of farms closed between 2005 and 2015, whereas corporate farms or industrial farms using heavy chemicals and damaging techniques increased by 240%. This is not good for us. This is not good for our environment or our future. The last and most shocking thing for me is the average age for farmers in Japan is above 65 years old. This is bad. Now, Japanese people live longer than any people in the world. My son likes to tell me this. He just learned this in social studies in school. He said, we're going to live the longest. I'm like, great. But that doesn't mean these elderly people can get out there and farm, and even if they can, they're not going to live that much longer. Who's going to take it over for them? Who's the next younger generation? And I got to say, I've mentioned it a few times, this Han X thing, or this low income thing. That's why. Who wants to take a job where you're not going to make a lot of money? You're going to work yourself to death outside in the heat. Not a lot of people are stepping up in line for this. So I'm hoping to spread the word to you and to your, to other young people all over the country and all over the world. We need more farmers. We need more growers. But why? I mean, it's grueling work. You saw me toiling in the summer there with the haddock, right? The pay is really low. So why would anybody want to become a farmer? I got to be crazy, right? And I guess I kind of am. But this right here is part of my salary. I got to say that I absolutely love what I see almost every day. The skies are just spectacular. Not every day, but often. You have to look, but it's the simple pleasures like this that really make me feel a quality of life. A peace of mind through seeing other life interacting on my farm. I feel like often I am being watched, and approved of, because these little frogs, I see hundreds of them every day. And frogs, scientists will say frogs are one of the really great measures of the health of an environment. If you have frogs, your environment is really in good balance because they eat the insects and they live in the water system. And these are the things that are being affected by climate change and by pollution. So I'm so happy to have so many frogs every day on my farm. But it's not just the frogs, it's all life, all over the place. I can't get away from it. And while they don't have voices that we can hear, still, I put them out there because somebody needs to stand up for these things. Because who really cares if all the praying mantises die? Well, I do. I do. I really, really do. And I think other people should as well. Now, this is a monkey print in the mud on my farm. And I know your sensei knows how I feel about monkeys. I hate them. They're the worst enemies. But they're also, again, just like us, just like the praying mantis, just like the frogs. They're just a natural organism trying to survive. So they come onto my farm to eat all the vegetables because the cedar are killing all the natural plants. So they don't have as much food. So they need to come on the farms. And I've made my peace with the monkeys, fortunately. This past year with growing in Kyoto where there are no monkeys, suddenly I feel like, okay, they came to the farm and took these things. That's okay. I'll let them have it. But this is the kind of thing we struggle with. Are the insects the enemy? No, they're not the enemy. They're just right now something we have to deal with. Now the mamushi. I've seen more than 20 or 30 mamushi over the years on my farm, The first one being this far away from my face as I was looking under a zucchini plant and it was right there. The first one I ever saw on the farm. I'll never forget it. And unfortunately, because I have so many kids coming onto my farm, I kill the mamushi that I found. Because if a child was bitten by one, it would be something inexcusable. If I knew that it was there. I mean, if it just happens, it just happens. I would still feel bad. But if, oh yeah, I forgot there was a mamushi there. Child dies on the way to the hospital. Well, that's more serious than the mamushi. But fortunately, I don't have so many kids there these days. And my son is old enough to learn about snakes and he loves mamushi. So I no longer have to kill them. Again, finding this balance with the nature around us, I think is a very important lesson that I've learned. And this is quite a rare snake. Yamakagashi is what it's called. And my son loves this snake. It's a very beautiful one. But again, I don't see it very much. And I think it's suffering from climate change in my area. But some of these things, I saw this butterfly and it had just come out of the cocoon and it was very slow and it was still drying its wings. So I was able to get a wonderful video and I was able to pick it up and hold it and look at it closely. And these things, they're so beautiful and they're so fragile. I can't understand how they can exist in this brutal natural world. And it reminds me that that is the balance of nature, that it has that brutality, but it also has that fragility, that beauty that's somehow inexplicable. These are satoimo plants. I don't know if you've ever had a taro or satoimo, but they're just so-so vegetables, right? These are not something that's like, hey, let's go get some taro. I love it. Nobody says that, nobody. But they're wonderful plants to grow. They're giant, beautiful, so easy to grow. In fact, you have to try to kill them and it takes effort, but nobody wants to eat them. So this plant that has been the main staple for so many communities in Polynesia and other island communities because they grow so well. You can eat the leaves, you can eat the tubers, high calorie, again, not a lot of taste. But if you've ever been to Hawaii, this is what poi is made from. But I learned this last year. I grew probably 200 kilograms of these things. I only sold about 10 because nobody wanted them. This is one of those things, is these things that are so sustainable and so wonderfully good for us, nobody wants them anymore. This is what they want. These really difficult to grow tomatoes that are really, really hard to grow, I got to tell you. But this is what will make money. This is what people want. So these are lessons, again, that I'm learning. But I'm doing my best to bring this diversity to my customers, to my community with these rare zucchinis. This is a Cocozel zucchini, which is again in the squash family. And I see this food being produced from beginning to end. I mean, who doesn't love sugar snap peas or snap endo? These are one of the best foods in the world, as far as I'm concerned. Roma tomatoes, I took this 2 days ago. This, for the first time, I'm really growing Roma tomatoes well. And I don't know if you know the difference between Roma tomatoes and a regular tomato, but this is what you get when you buy a can of tomatoes. This is the tomato that they use. It's a very special tomato. It's better for sauces. It's less sweet, but it has this very rich flavor that's really great. Now, those are two of my biggest squash I ever grew. Those are called Blue Hubbard squash, right in front of those butternuts. And was so proud of those. But how do you sell that? I mean, it weighs 15 kilograms. Nobody's going to eat that whole thing. So I'd have to cut it up to sell it. But what a wonderful thing to grow. And the leaves for this plant are this big around. It's just a wonder to see it grow. My butternuts. Oh, I got to tell you, when I'm rich in butternuts, I'm a happy guy because this is one of the best foods. Oh, just so good. Raw, juiced, fried in soups, stews, curries. I even puree it and make pasta sauce out of it. Halloween pumpkins. So beautiful, right? Nobody eats them though. I stopped growing them because I found it's just not sustainable for me to grow something that people are using for decoration. You know, I'm giving of my land, my efforts, my time for something that's beautiful for a couple of weeks and then people just throw away. So I stopped growing them, but as you can see, pretty easy to grow. I got pretty good at it. Daikon in the snow. This is a lesson I want you to take with you. Kyoto City used to have wonderful daikon. You could buy in the supermarket from somebody growing it within the city limits. That's not true anymore. People still grow it. You can still buy it, but it's not wonderful anymore. Why? It's because there is a chemical reaction that takes place when the vegetables are covered in snow. These plants are full of starch. And when they receive this weather that's too cold, they convert that starch to sugar. And that's why the daikon are so sweet. I can still grow sweet daikon because I'm up in the mountains where we still get snow. Same thing with carrots. Same thing with turnips and other radishes. If you grow them in the cold weather, they're going to be way, way sweeter. I just love setting up my vegetables in these little patterns. It's just food art. And these plants, again, this is part of my salary. This is what I look up at and see. This is a tomato plant, if you didn't know. And even the weeds that grow around the farm and the flowers, the rice fields, the valley, the kominka, the houses that have been there for hundreds of years, the small little shrines set up in the mountains, dedicated to different things, different elements of nature. This one is where farmers go to pray, actually. And having my son on the farm, these are the things that are my real salary. It's not what I take home for money. And that's all I've got for my slides. Thank you very much. I don't know if you have it.
Pleasure for a very nice presentation about not only about agriculture, as you realize, but I could say maybe agriculture as a way of life. Maybe, and you see how it's very, very wide, and it seems far away from our everyday life, but in the same time, it's what we eat every day, and so it's very important. And so we read some articles about Chuck's work, and you heard his presentation. And do you have any questions? Start.
I also brought some friends with me. So
Oh,
this is an 8-ball zucchini. I bet none of you have ever seen one of those. This is a patty pan squash. This is a China jade cucumber, the best cucumber I have ever eaten, and I've eaten over 20 varieties. This is one of those Roma tomatoes. And this is another nice tomato. This book called Farmers of 40 Centuries. This was written by a professor, F.H. King. And he traveled to Japan over 100 years ago, as well as China and Korea, to learn about organic farming, because America was in a big big depression and a big dust bowl. We were destroying our environment with farming, and then moving to the next field, farming, without regenerating the soil. And he learned about regenerating the soil and brought those secrets back to America, basically saving agriculture in the US. Wonderful book, very, very wonderful. And this is my planting schedule, something that all farmers have to keep so they can rotate their crops and remember what grew. So feel free to come and look at these when you have time. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt the question. So, of course, yes.
Questions?
Yeah, I actually have one note, like, your self-sufficiency when you produce your own products. Do you like, if you do, like, how do you get any other produce? Is there like a community doing that? There's a village that's also exchange with crops? Or do you actually use some of the services like, the supermarkets and stuff?
That's a good question. And yeah, I do go to the supermarket. I'm not very good at producing mushrooms yet, although I'm trying to produce a lot more shiitake and oyster mushrooms this year. And I love it when I actually get them to eat, but I love mushrooms too much, so I have to buy those in the supermarket. And I don't produce rice, so we have to buy rice, even though I eat very little of it. And I just can't keep up with my diet. Plus, as I said, I don't make a lot of money, so I have to sell all my produce as much as I can. So often there isn't anything left for me. It's only when there's extra that my family gets to eat it. So, yeah. But a lot of other farmers are kind of in contact with each other and trying to share around products and try to do that. But I think it's not something a lot of people really, really do. Again, if it's as a business, you're set up trying to sell things more than anything else. And plus, by the time you're done farming, you're so tired, you don't really want to cook. So often, unless you're married and your spouse cooks or somebody cooks for you, you're going out to eat or something like that if you have enough money. So it's a good question. And that's probably the goal for me and a lot of other farmers, is to be completely self-sufficient. But it's something more of a goal than an actual state of mind right now. Thank you.
Question from Sarah.
Does he still have to do teaching or can he make up his living from farming?
What was the first part?
Do you still do the teaching?
Like I said, in 2021, last year, I gave it up. And so for more than a year now, I have not been a teacher. But I've learned that I'm not making enough money. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to go back to do something. And like I said, what would be the best for me is to do something with the farm for teaching. And one idea is to do the farm experience, but to get there is quite troublesome. So I've been trying to figure out ways to set up something in the city. And right now I'm toying with the idea of using some land to build a small teaching garden, and then have people be able to take the train or the bus or a bicycle to come to my place and learn about gardening in the city. And then perhaps once a month have an event up at the farm, and then try to grow kind of a gardening club maybe, or something like that. Because I feel like, actually, ever since I first came to Japan, I was amazed. These little houses all packed together on the street. Everybody's got their little containers of flowers and herbs and even vegetables and things like that. So I think the Japanese really love growing things. So I think it's just trying to tap into that with some maybe English education, and then maybe I can make a living. I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you.
What is your phone story?
Right now, my son wants to be a science teacher. That's what he wants to do. I was a science teacher. He loves science. Every year we do the elementary school science project in the summer. And last year I found an animal skull, and I didn't know what it was. And I gave it to him. I said, there's your summer project. You have to find out what that is. And he did it all himself. And he wrote this big thing. He got an award from the city and everything for and he was put up in the city hall and everything else. So he loves that sort of thing. But probably he'll just become regular Japanese guy, you know, working for some company. But my wife and I are both teachers. So we were really proud to hear that he wants to be a teacher. So here's hoping. But, yeah. He loves YouTube, but like Pokemon and really funny YouTube now. Really, he watches it all the time. Sometimes in English though, so that's good.
How was the field you saw in the pictures compared to your grandfather field? Mhm. So it's rice fields and then.
He has figs, strawberries, and some vegetables.
And where does he sell? Oh,
He sells to JA. Yeah. Mhm. Which means he gets his seeds and fertilizers and materials from JA and then sells back the vegetables. Yeah. It's a circle kind of thing. Yeah. That's very common. The difference with some of my stuff, except for this one, these are all heirloom seeds, which means I take the seed out of this, I plant it in the ground next year, and I get the same tomato. This one, it wouldn't happen. I would get a different tomato, a really bad tasting one, because this is a hybrid. And these are all heirloom. So I can save the seeds and keep it for next year. So that's quite a nice thing for sustainability, especially when you think like after COVID and this huge problem in the Ukraine, the shipping of materials is stopped sometimes. So to think about if seeds are gone, where's our food going to come from? So this represents food security, whereas this is kind of a luxury. So I like to use heirloom seeds when I can, and I like to try to save seeds when I can too.
Just to find that it's actually kind of better when it's your own crop because the seed is already to your soil.
You're very smart. Yes, you know, that is exactly right. By the way, none of these vegetables came from Japan originally. None of them. These are not Japanese vegetables originally. And like I said, many of them come from South America. But either way, we're growing something that's not perfectly suited for the Japanese environment, right? It's been hybridized. So that's why it grows really, really well and is really cute and tasty. But these are not. So what you are saying is correct, is that if I save the seed from this one, and I do that for 10 years, suddenly I have the best seeds because I save the best one. I take the best, very best 8-ball zucchini that I made. It's big, it grew on a great healthy plant, better than all the others. I'll keep that seed and I'll grow it again next year and I'll get a whole crop, whole field of the same kind. And then I'll do that again and again, till suddenly I have the best seeds for my fields. And that's a real great point, is that is real sustainability, is creating those strains. I'm not hybridizing them. I'm not changing the seed DNA or anything. It's not GMO, but I am keeping the ones that are the best to make the strongest ones for my soil, my environment, my farm. And that's a real great way to be a very sustainable farmer. That's right.
I'm investing in compost. And in my house, how can I use compost? My house. Make compost or buy the material?
Are you asking how to use the finished compost or how to take your food scrap and make compost? Both, okay.
Yeah.
Well, to use the compost, if you have any plant, a tree or a garden, flowers, vegetables, anything in a pot or on the soil, just put it there, put it on top. And it's not going to bring insects. It's just soil. It's going to become part of your soil and the plants are going to do really well. But even if they don't, it's just putting it back in nature. So you're not throwing it away. To make it is it's not easy in the city. In the countryside, I have a giant pile where I put a lot of food scraps and a lot of leaves or momigara or straw, or even sometimes paper or cardboard can be composted. Not too much. I don't use too much, but sometimes. And that mix of dry brown materials and fresh green materials makes a great mix. But it's in the country, so there's insects going in there. There's mice going in there. There's other things getting in there, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's okay because it's in the countryside. Whereas in the city, it can be tricky. So I think the Japanese bokashi is very genius, actually, because it's a way of fermenting the food waste and creating a wonderful food for the plants, and it's closed so that insects and rats and things can't go inside and the smell doesn't come out. But as soon as you open it, the smell is quite strong. So your neighbor or your mother might not like the idea. And my wife hated the idea. So I gave that up very fast. But that's one way to do it. But then you have to do something with the bokashi. And unlike finished compost, which doesn't have a smell, bokashi has a very strong smell. So if you're serious, let's try to think about some way to make a bokashi club where everybody has a bucket and you fill it up. And when it's full, you call me and I'll come and I'll pick it up and give you another bucket. And then you fill that up and same kind of thing. I've thought about doing this before, but I never had a K-truck. But now I have a K-truck. So I don't want to carry a buckets in my car because if they spill, oh, it's so bad. So this is a good idea if we can make some sort of a student bokashi club or something like this for people, because I hope to encourage other people to try sustainable things. Yeah.
That's a trend right now. Also, like when people want to make compost, but they don't have space or they can't do it, they just like have other people collecting the waste from their houses. So in buckets, they just collect them like over a week in their house, and then someone else take it and then maybe return with a better.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yes, it's time, but yes, this idea of recycle is very important too, and it brings us back to yes, to life.
Yeah.
This other things. I think it's very important to think about what the small things we can do that can help, and as Chuck said, it's not only about you doing something, it's creating a new community and doing things together, and then creates some new wave. Yes, start something new and bringing hope, hopefully. Like Chuck is doing very well with his work. So thank you again, Chuck, for sharing with us
Pleasure.
your experience.
Thank you for listening. It was very long, sorry.
But yeah, it was very good conclusion to this class and what we've been doing. So next week will be the last class. Still don't know what we're doing. But yeah, so thank you again for coming.
My pleasure.